All right, high school, 9th and 10th grade. I'm going to go over your history lessons for you. Just kind of give you an explanation of what you're going to be looking at this week. That way you know what you're studying. I'll help you understand it a little bit better. So this chapter is chapter 31. It's going to be talking about World War I and afterwards. Last week you should have gotten an introduction into World War I, as well as some of the events that led up to World War I. So hopefully by now you have a good understanding of who was involved and what was happening. But this is going to discuss more of what's happening in World War I, as well as the fallout. Obviously, you have a war that big where the entire world is coming together in battle. There's going to be some nasty results that come in it, some consequences. So that's what this chapter is going to be discussing. So just some initial thoughts written by the author here. Winston Churchill, Prime Minister of England during World War II, describes World War I this way. Okay, so this is Winston Churchill talking. All the horrors of all the ages were brought together, and not only armies, but whole populations were thrust into the midst of them. The mighty, educated, states involved conceived, not without reasons, that their very existence was at stake. Neither peoples nor rulers drew the line at any deed which they thought could help them to win. Germany, having let hell loose, kept well in the forefront of terror, but she was followed step by step by the desperate and ultimately avenging nations she had assailed. Every outrage against humanity or international law was repaid by reprisals, often of a greater scale and of longer duration. No truce or parley mitigated the strife of the armies. The wounded died between the lines, the dead moldered into the soil. Merchant ships and neutral ships and hospital ships were sunk on the seas, and all on board left to their fate or killed as they swam. Every effort was made to starve whole nations into submission without regard to age or sex. Cities and monuments were smashed by artillery, bombs from the air were cast down indiscriminately, poison gas in many forms stifled or seared the soldiers, liquid fire was projected upon their bodies, men fell from the air in flames or were smothered often slowly in the dark recesses of the sea. The fighting strength of the armies was limited only by the manhood of their countries. So Winston Churchill is describing some of what happened. A lot of the parties that were involved in World War I didn't really care about the individuals. They cared about power or making political statements. And there was a lot of suffering from individuals, civilians, men, women, children, all had to go through an awful, awful time during World War I because of the fighting. So a couple of objectives, things that you should be able to discuss after studying these chapters. In Chapter 31, we will look at the aftermath of World War I. In particular, we will examine the Versailles Treaty, and next we will pause and listen to contemporary voices whose cries of anguish reverberate across the country. Next, we will examine the great flu pandemic that killed more men than the war itself. Finally, we will revisit London at the beginning of the 20th century. So as a result of this chapter, you should be able to evaluate the Treaty of Versailles. You'll need to be able to know what that is. That'll probably end up being one of your questions. I don't know that for sure. You'll need to discuss the contemporary voices of the war, so the individuals who were involved, the leading political speakers, the leading, really just the leaders of the different militaries. You need to know the key players. Analyze the impact of the influenza epidemic on world history, which you should be able to do that. And then number 4, explore how London grew as a 20th century cultural and commercial center in Western Europe. So the first lesson will be on the Versailles Treaty. Have a couple questions there. What was the outcome and why did it satisfy no one? Lesson 2, contemporary voices, discussing the key players. Number 3, we'll be discussing the flu, which, we're going through an epidemic right now, and so hopefully this will hit you a little bit more. You'll be able to understand better what these individuals were dealing with as they talk about the flu. And keep in mind it's a different day and time. How we spend our time indoors and dealing with the coronavirus is very different than how they were forced to deal with the flu. So pay close attention there. And then post-war London, talking about London at the end of the war. So go ahead and read through each of the 4 lessons. Again, be sure that you turn in not only the chapter quiz, but also the chapter lessons. Some of you have not been turning in everything. You need to make sure that you do that. Otherwise, your grade will not be recorded. So let me know if you have any questions or need any help with any of the question or any of the